The flag in his hand weighed heavier than it ever had before. Walter Henderson stood near the back of the rally grounds, the sharp sun beating down on his weathered skin. In one hand, he held the folded triangle of stars and stripes that had once covered the casket of his best friend. In the other, a simple, crumpled letter, a plea, a reminder. The crowd surged toward the main stage, roaring approval at slogans shouted from polished politicians. "We honor every American who has sacrificed for this country. Our veterans are the backbone of our freedom." Thunderous applause. But none of the men on stage looked toward the back, toward the man who had worn the uniform, carried the scars, and buried the fallen. Walter took a steady breath. He moved closer to the stage. Nobody noticed. He lifted the flag slightly, hoping someone, anyone, would see. Instead, a rally coordinator in a crisp suit cut him off, flashing a hollow smile. "Sir, this area's reserved. Please, stay back." Walt nodded stiffly. He was used to being overlooked. He stepped aside, watching as the crowd ate up hollow promises with hungry cheers. Behind the speaker, a massive screen displayed words like honor, courage, and sacrifice. Bright, flashy, empty. Walter stood alone, silent, in the same country he had fought for, ignored by the same people who praised sacrifice with one hand and shoved it aside with the other. The speeches rolled on, slick and scripted. The donors in the front rows clapped on cue. The cameras panned across perfect angles. No one filmed the Marine standing in the dirt, flag in hand. No one asked about the letter crumpled in his coat pocket. He wasn't part of the show. He wasn't photogenic enough for the brochure. And just when Walter turned to leave, his boots heavy, his heart heavier, a ripple moved through the crowd. A shudder, like a shift in the air pressure. Phones shot up into the sky. Security scrambled. Whispers turned into shouts. A black SUV glided through the barricades like a shark through waves. The side door swung open. And Donald Trump stepped onto the rally grounds. No speech, no grand entrance, just a silent presence that bent the entire atmosphere toward him. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He scanned the stage. He scanned the crowd. And then he saw it. Not the banners, not the cameras, not the politicians. He saw Walter, an old Marine, a folded flag, a man forgotten. Trump pointed toward him. Security hesitated. He pointed again, sharper. The rally staff looked confused. This wasn't on the program. But Trump was already moving, through the polished crowds, through the polished speeches, straight toward the man everyone else had forgotten. For a moment, nobody moved. Walter Henderson stood frozen, the flag trembling lightly in his hand. He watched as the crowd parted, slowly, almost unwillingly, like a wave breaking against a stubborn rock. Donald Trump walked directly toward him. No teleprompter, no handlers whispering in his ear. Just a man who had recognized something real amid a sea of pretense. The cameras, which moments earlier had been glued to the shiny stage and the smiling politicians, now scrambled to follow him. You could see it clearly on the faces of the event organizers. This was not supposed to happen. The master of ceremonies, standing on stage with his microphone, stuttered. "Ah, Mr. President, if you could please join us on the stage." Trump didn't even glance at him. He reached Walter in a few determined strides. He stopped just inches away, looked the old Marine in the eye, and said nothing for a long, powerful second. No slogans, no sound bites, only respect. Finally, Trump spoke. Not into a microphone, but directly to Walter. "You've given enough speeches. It's our turn to listen." The words hung in the air. Simple. Final. He took Walter gently by the shoulder and turned to the crowd. "This man right here," Trump said, raising his voice slightly so the microphones could catch it, has done more for America than any of us standing on this stage. The stadium went silent. No chants, no applause, just stunned, raw silence. Some looked down at their feet in shame. Others turned away, uncomfortable. Trump wasn't finished. He took Walter's letter from his hand, carefully, like it was something sacred, and held it up for the crowd to see. He didn't come here to ask for praise. He didn't come here to take pictures. He came here with a folded flag and a folded letter, because he still believes we can do better. Trump's voice grew heavier. You can chant freedom all day long, but unless you honor the ones who bought it, you're just making noise. The message cut deeper than any speech that day. You could see it in the body language. The donors shifting awkwardly in their seats, the young interns lowering their campaign signs, the camera crews zooming in nervously. Trump placed a firm hand on Walter's back. You, he said clearly, are the real backbone of America. Not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. Walter's mouth trembled slightly. He didn't know what to say. Marines are trained to stand tall under fire, but they're never trained for moments like this. The crowd, slowly at first, began to clap. Not the orchestrated rhythmic clapping of a political rally. This was uneven, raw, real. A few stood up, then more, until half the field was on their feet. A thunder of hands meeting hands, boots stomping the ground, flags waving not for slogans, but for a man who didn't ask to be noticed. Walter wiped a hand across his weathered face, blinking back tears. He had stood there minutes ago, invisible. Now, the whole world was watching him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel forgotten. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled across the field like a wave, crashing over the polished speeches, the rehearsed smiles, the hollow promises. Walter Henderson stood center stage now, not because he had climbed up there, but because the people had lifted him there with their eyes, their hands, their hearts, and somewhere in the chaos, the facade cracked. The rally organizer, a young, over-eager man with a headset, rushed toward Trump. Mr. President, we really need to stick to the schedule. Trump held up a hand, a simple gesture, a wall. The schedule can wait. The organizer froze. The stage behind them looked awkward now, rows of politicians shifting uncomfortably, trapped in their perfectly tailored suits, unsure whether to sit or stand, clap or retreat. One of the main speakers, a congressman running for re-election, grabbed a mic and tried to salvage the moment. We honor all veterans today, of course. Every single one of them. The crowd didn't cheer. Not anymore. Because now they had seen the difference between words and action. Between polished patriotism and real sacrifice. Between the pretend and the earned. Trump turned to Walter, holding the crumpled letter in his hand. He motioned to the nearby podium, the one that minutes ago had been reserved for empty rhetoric. You have something to say, Marine? Walter hesitated. His boots scuffed the dust. He wasn't a speaker. He didn't know the right words. But when he stepped up to the microphone, when he unfolded the letter with trembling hands, the field fell silent again. He cleared his throat. Once. And then he read. Not a speech. Not an attack. A simple list of names. Friends he had lost. Brothers who never made it home. Stories too heavy for banners and too real for slogans. No shouting, no drama. Just name after name. Each one carried on the soft rasp of a voice that had carried too much for too long. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the first 10 rows. Men who had spent careers shouting about patriotism wiped their eyes with trembling fingers. Women in campaign T-shirts clutched their hearts. Even some reporters, trained to keep their distance, lowered their cameras for a moment of silence. Walter looked up. "You say you honor veterans," he said quietly. "Then honor their silence. Honor their scars. Honor the ones who never got the chance to hear you say it." He stepped back. He didn't drop the microphone. He simply folded his letter again, placed it carefully back into his coat pocket, and turned to walk off the stage. But before he could, Trump caught him by the shoulder, firm, respectful. "You're not leaving." Walter blinked. Trump turned to the crowd, his voice ringing out with no need for microphones. "This man isn't just a guest here today. From now on, he's the reason we're here." The crowd exploded. But this time, it wasn't the explosion of blind cheers and party slogans. It was real. It was earned. It was the sound of a nation remembering itself. And as the cheers roared across the rally grounds, the polished politicians, the ones who had shaken hands and posed for cameras all morning, stood in the shadow of a man who needed none of it. Because Walter Henderson hadn't come for applause. He had come to be heard. And now he was. As the rally ended, the sun dipped low behind the buildings, casting long shadows over the field. The crowds lingered, not to get autographs, not to take selfies, but simply to stand there, to breathe in a moment that felt different from anything they had been promised. Walter Henderson sat quietly on a wooden bench near the rally grounds, the folded flag resting gently on his lap. His calloused fingers traced the stitches, worn soft by years of reverent touch. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying. He simply was. Beside him, Donald Trump stood silently. No cameras flashing now, no staged photo ops, just two men, a Marine and a citizen, a flag and a country. A small boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, walked up hesitantly, a miniature flag clutched in his hand. He looked at Walter with wide, curious eyes. "Mister," he said, his voice small but clear, "were you really a soldier?" Walter chuckled softly, a dry sound filled with warmth. "I still am, son, in here." He tapped his chest gently. The boy looked down at his own tiny flag, then back at the one folded in Walter's lap. Without a word, he straightened his back and saluted. A pure, simple, uncoached salute. Walter nodded back, a slight quiver in his jaw. Across the field, others noticed, and one by one, silently, without any instruction, veterans, police officers, firefighters, even ordinary citizens, began to raise their hands in salute. No anthems, no applause, only silent respect. Because for the first time in a long time, they weren't saluting a politician. They weren't saluting a slogan. They were saluting the truth. They were saluting a man who had carried the weight of sacrifice quietly, humbly, and alone. Trump stepped forward. He leaned down to Walter's level, placed a hand over the folded flag, and said quietly enough that only Walter could hear, "They forgot you once, but they won't forget again." Walter looked up. For the first time all day, he smiled. Not a big smile, not a media-ready smile, a real one, the kind you earn. And in that simple moment, beneath the bruised colors of the sunset sky, the folded flag seemed to breathe again. Not just as a symbol of loss, but as a promise renewed. Some heroes fight battles you'll never see. Some victories are not won with banners or speeches, but with quiet dignity that no power can erase. Walter Henderson didn't ask to be remembered. He simply stood his ground. And today, a nation finally stood with him.